I'm Abigail Harmon, 35 years old, and CEO of one of the most innovative agricultural technology companies in America. But standing outside my childhood home, clutching a carefully wrapped gift, none of that mattered. My brother Curtis pointed toward the back of the house. "Park around there and use the kitchen entrance," he said dismissively. 10 years of building a multi-million-dollar company, and I was still the farm girl not good enough for the front door. Until someone called me Madam CEO, and everything changed. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I finally made them see me. Growing up on our family farm in rural Nebraska shaped everything about me, including the wounds I carried into adulthood. My father, Richard Harmon, was a third-generation farmer with traditional values that felt set in stone. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my brothers Jason and Curtis were the inheritors of everything that mattered. They were boys, after all. Our farmhouse sat on 800 acres of land that had been in the Harmon family since my great-grandfather staked his claim. The sprawling fields of corn and soybeans stretched in every direction, and the massive red barn stood as the centerpiece of our operation. It was a beautiful place to grow up, but the unspoken rules made it less than idyllic for a girl with ambitions. "Abby, leave that to your brothers," became the soundtrack of my childhood whenever I tried to help with meaningful farm work. My mother, Margaret, would redirect me to the kitchen or the garden, her gentle hands guiding me away from the tractor or the equipment shed. She loved me, I never doubted that, but she had accepted her place in our family hierarchy long ago and expected me to do the same. When I was 8, I remember asking my father if I could drive the tractor like Jason, who was 10 at the time. "Farming isn't for girls, Abby," he said without looking up from his paperwork. "You'll get married someday and move to your husband's place. No point learning skills you won't need." That same summer, Curtis, my younger brother by just a year, was already being taught to operate the irrigation system. I watched from the porch as my father patiently explained the mechanics to him, their heads bent together over the controls, a perfect picture of generational knowledge being passed down. Just not to me. My mother found me crying in my room that night. She sat on my bed and stroked my hair. "Your father means well," she said softly. "He just wants what's best for everyone. How is it best for me to be left out?" I asked through tears. She had no answer, just a sad smile and a kiss on my forehead. Despite these early lessons in my supposed limitations, I developed a fierce passion for the science behind agriculture. While my brothers learned to work the land according to traditional methods, I became fascinated by how we might farm better, more sustainably, and with greater yields. By 13, I had converted a corner of our property into my own experimental greenhouse, using salvaged materials and money saved from my allowance. It wasn't much, just a small plastic structure with a few planting beds, but it was mine. I ordered seeds from catalogs and began testing different growing conditions, meticulously documenting the results in notebooks. My father walked past my greenhouse every day on his way to the fields, but never once stepped inside. When I excitedly showed him a tomato variety I had developed that seemed more resistant to local pests, he glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Abby. Playing with plants is fine for a hobby, but it's not real farming." His dismissal stung, but it also hardened my resolve. If he couldn't see the value in innovation, I would find people who could. My mother became my secret supporter. She would slip me gardening books from the library and occasionally buy specialized seeds when she went into town. Once, she brought home a college brochure for the University of Nebraska's agricultural science program. "Just something to think about," she said casually, but her eyes told me she understood my dreams better than I thought. Throughout high school, I maintained excellent grades while continuing my experiments. I applied for scholarships in secret, knowing my father would never willingly pay for my education, especially in a field he thought should remain the domain of men. When the acceptance letter came with a full scholarship offer, I waited until dinner to announce my plans. "I've been accepted to the University of Nebraska's agricultural science program," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I start in the fall." The clatter of my father's fork against his plate echoed in the sudden silence. "College is a waste for a girl," he finally said. "Especially studying farming. What do you think you're going to do with that degree? No one will hire a woman to tell them how to run their farm." "Maybe I'll run my own farm," I countered. He laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine disbelief, which was somehow worse. And where would you get the money for that? This land goes to your brothers. That's always been the plan. My brothers shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. They had been raised in the certainty of their inheritance and had never questioned it. The argument escalated until my father delivered his ultimatum. If you go, don't expect to come back. We won't be funding foolishness. That night, my mother helped me pack. Her hands trembled as she folded my clothes. He'll come around, she whispered, though we both knew it wasn't true. Just give him time. The morning I left, my father was already in the fields. Whether by coincidence or design, we didn't say goodbye. As the bus pulled away from our small town, I watched the familiar landscape recede, unsure when or if I would return. College was a revelation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't see my gender as a limitation in agriculture. My professors evaluated me on the quality of my work, not whether farming was appropriate for a woman. Still, the transition wasn't easy. Without family support, I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover expenses beyond my scholarship. I waited tables at a local diner, restocked shelves at a campus bookstore, and worked in the university's agricultural lab as a research assistant. My apartment was a tiny studio above a laundromat that filled with the scent of fabric softener every evening. The space barely fit a bed and desk, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. Freedom has its own particular sweetness, even when accompanied by exhaustion. I called home monthly during my first year. My mother would answer, her voice lighting up before dropping to a whisper as she updated me on family news. My father never came to the phone. When I asked about him, she would say, he's busy with the harvest, or he's checking the irrigation system, or any number of farming tasks that apparently took precedence over speaking to his daughter. By my junior year, I had developed a research project on drought-resistant crop varieties that caught the attention of Professor Eleanor Williams, one of the few female agricultural scientists in the department. She became the mentor I had always longed for, pushing me to refine my ideas and introducing me to her network in the industry. You have a unique perspective, Abigail, she told me after reviewing my research proposal. Coming from a traditional farming background, but approaching problems with fresh eyes. Don't let anyone convince you that's not valuable. Under her guidance, my research flourished. I developed a modified irrigation system that reduced water usage by 30% while maintaining crop yields. When the university hosted an agricultural innovation conference my senior year, Professor Williams insisted I present my findings. Standing at the podium before industry professionals and fellow students, I spotted a familiar face in the back row. My mother had come, having told my father she was visiting her sister in Lincoln. She didn't say a word during the presentation but hugged me fiercely afterward. He should see you now, she whispered. He would be so proud. But we both knew that wasn't true. My success in this world only validated his decision to exclude me from his. After graduation, I declined several corporate job offers to continue developing my own systems. The starting salary would have been comfortable, but working for large agribusiness corporations meant surrendering control of my innovations. I wanted to help individual farmers, not just boost corporate profits. With Professor Williams' encouragement, I applied for a small business grant and launched my startup at 26 from a converted warehouse space in Omaha. I named it Agritech Solutions, focusing on developing sustainable farming technologies accessible to mid-sized family operations like the one I grew up on. The first 2 years were brutal. My initial prototype for a water conservation system failed field tests, forcing me back to the drawing board. Potential investors walked away, unconvinced that farmers would adopt new technology from such a young company, especially one led by a woman. I maxed out 3 credit cards and moved into the office to save on rent. I still remember the night I nearly gave up. Sitting on my folding cot in the corner of my office, surrounded by failed prototypes and rejection letters, I called Rebecca, my best friend from college who had stood by me through everything. Maybe my dad was right, I told her, my voice breaking. Maybe this isn't for me. Abby, she said firmly, your father was wrong about you at 18, and he's still wrong now. You're not failing, you're learning. Every great innovation had setbacks first. Her faith sustained me through another round of design improvements. 6 months later, I secured my first investor after cornering him at an agricultural technology conference and demonstrating my latest prototype right there in the hotel lobby. His investment allowed me to hire 2 engineers and move development forward. The breakthrough came in my 3rd year of business. Our redesigned water conservation system showed remarkable results in beta testing with 5 Nebraska farms. Word spread quickly in the farming community, and orders began trickling in. Each successful implementation led to more referrals. By year 5, Agritech Solutions had grown to 15 employees. Our technology was helping hundreds of farmers across the Midwest reduce resource usage while maintaining productivity. Industry publications began featuring our work, and I was invited to speak at conferences I had once attended as a hopeful student. Through it all, I sent newspaper clippings and magazine features home, not to boast, but as evidence that my path had merit. The clippings were never acknowledged. My mother would mention receiving them during our phone calls, but couldn't tell me if my father had read them. As success mounted, I bought my first home, a modest 3-bedroom house with a large backyard where I installed an elaborate garden system showcasing our irrigation technology. The house remained mostly unfurnished for months as I poured every spare dollar back into the business, but it represented something profound to me. Roots of my own choosing. When Agritech Solutions hit $10 million in annual revenue in our 7th year, Forbes featured us in an article about innovative women entrepreneurs in traditionally male-dominated industries. The photographer captured me standing in a test field, wind blowing through my hair, with irrigation equipment visible in the background. I looked confident, successful, and completely at home in the agricultural world my father had tried to keep me from. I sent a copy of the magazine home with a simple note. Thought you might like to see this. I never learned if it was read or immediately discarded. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as I reviewed quarterly projections with my financial team. My phone vibrated with a notification, and I glanced down reflexively. The sender's name made me freeze mid-sentence. Margaret Harmon. My mother rarely emailed, preferring our scheduled monthly phone calls. An unexpected message usually meant something was wrong. I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into my office to read it privately. Dear Abby, it began. Your father is turning 60 next month, and we're hosting a celebration at the farm on the 15th. It would mean a lot to have all our children present. Please let me know if you can attend. Love, Mom. No mention of our years of estrangement. No acknowledgement of the fact that I hadn't been invited home for any birthday, holiday, or celebration in over a decade. Just a simple invitation as if nothing had ever happened. I stared at the screen until my assistant knocked on the door, concerned by my extended absence from the meeting. I quickly composed myself and returned to the conference room, but my mind remained fixed on those few lines from my mother. That evening, I called Rebecca, who had stood by me through every high and low since college. They want me to come to Dad's 60th birthday, I told her, still processing the invitation. Are you going to go? She asked after a thoughtful pause. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to show them how well I've done despite Dad's predictions. But another part thinks it's not worth reopening old wounds. What would it mean to you to go? Rebecca asked, cutting to the heart of the matter as she always did. I considered her question carefully. Maybe it's a chance for reconciliation. Mom wouldn't have invited me if Dad was completely opposed to seeing me. Or maybe she invited you without telling him, Rebecca suggested gently. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it shifted my perspective. You think I might show up and he wouldn't even know I was coming? I think you should call your mom and clarify before you make any decisions. I followed her advice and called my mother the next day. The conversation was brief and somewhat strained, but she assured me that my father knew I was being invited and hadn't objected. It wasn't enthusiastic approval, but it was something. We've set up tables in the yard, she explained. Many of your father's business associates and friends from town will be there. It's quite a milestone for him. There was something in her tone, a hint of hope perhaps, that swayed my decision. I'll be there, I promised, and the relief in her voice was palpable. The weeks before the party were filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I selected a gift I thought my father might appreciate, a rare vintage tractor model from the same year and make as his first tractor. It had taken considerable effort to track down, but I hoped it might serve as a peace offering, a symbol that despite our differences, I respected his life's work. As the date approached, I found myself lying awake at night, rehearsing conversations and scenarios. Would my brothers be civil? Would my father acknowledge my success? What would I say when inevitably asked about my life? Should I downplay my achievements to avoid appearing boastful, or should I stand firmly in my accomplishments? I flew into Omaha and rented a car for the 2-hour drive to our family farm. As familiar landmarks appeared, memories surfaced with them. The general store where I'd bought penny candy as a child. The high school where I'd graduated valedictorian, my father sitting stiffly in the audience. The turnoff to Professor Williams' family farm, where I'd spent many weekends learning practical applications for my theoretical knowledge. The countryside was beautiful in early summer, fields of young corn stretching to the horizon, the landscape so different from my urban life, yet still embedded in my DNA. I rolled down the windows and let the scent of rich soil and growing things fill the car. Whatever happened at the party, this land had shaped me, and I couldn't deny its pull. The gravel road leading to our farm hadn't changed, still rutted and winding between old oak trees. But as the house came into view, I noticed several differences. The barn had been repainted. New equipment gleamed in the yard. A second silo had been added, suggesting expanded production. Business was good, apparently. I felt a small surge of pride for my family, despite everything. The driveway was lined with cars, many of them expensive models that stood out against the rural backdrop. Clearly, my father's business associates had already arrived. I pulled in behind a Mercedes SUV, checking my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a simple but elegant navy dress with comfortable low heels, professional without being flashy. My auburn hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and I wore minimal jewelry, nothing that could be perceived as showing off. As I stepped out of the car, gift in hand, I spotted Curtis walking toward me. My younger brother had filled out since I'd last seen him, his face weathered from years working outdoors, but his eyes were the same deep brown as mine. "Abby," he said with a nod that wasn't quite warm but not entirely cold either. "You made it." "Hello, Curtis," I replied, moving forward as if to hug him, but his stiff posture stopped me. "It's good to see you." He glanced at my rental car, then at the row of vehicles in front of us. "You should park around back by the equipment shed," he said. "These spaces are for guests." The implication was clear. I wasn't considered a guest. Despite being invited, I was still an outsider. "And use the kitchen entrance," he added, already turning away. "The front's getting crowded." I watched him walk back toward the main gathering, my hands tightening around the carefully wrapped gift. After a decade of building a successful company, I was still being directed to the service entrance of my childhood home. I parked where Curtis had indicated, next to the tractors and combines in the equipment area behind the house. The contrast between my rental sedan and the massive farm machinery seemed to emphasize how out of place I was. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my father's gift and headed for the kitchen door. The familiar squeak of the screen door transported me instantly back to childhood. The kitchen smelled the same, a mixture of my mother's baking and the subtle scent of the lemon cleaner she had always preferred. 3 women I didn't recognize were bustling around, preparing trays of food. My mother appeared from the pantry, flour dusting her apron. For a moment, she simply stared, as if not quite believing I had actually come. "Abigail," she finally said, wiping her hands and moving toward me. Her hug was quick but genuine, her frame smaller than I remembered. "You look wonderful." "Hi, Mom," I replied, returning her embrace more fully. "The house looks great." "We repainted last spring," she said, her eyes darting nervously toward the doorway that led to the dining room and beyond. "Your father will be so glad you came." Her tone lacked conviction, but I nodded as if I believed her. One of the women approached us, eyeing me curiously. "Margaret, do you need this helper to take out the appetizer trays? The guests are getting hungry." My mother's face flushed. "No, Barbara, this is my daughter, Abigail." Barbara looked confused, then embarrassed. "Oh, I'm so sorry. When I saw you come through the kitchen, I assumed." "It's fine," I assured her, though it wasn't. "My brother suggested I use this entrance." Barbara's expression shifted to something like pity, which was somehow worse than her initial mistake. "Well, the party's through there. Your father is in the living room with most of the guests." I thanked her and moved toward the dining room, my mother trailing behind me. "I need to finish the desserts," she said apologetically. "But please, go say hello to your father." The dining room had been transformed with decorations celebrating my father's 60 years. Photos lined the walls, a timeline of his life from childhood to the present. I stopped to examine them, noting the progression from young farmer to family man to respected agricultural business owner. What struck me most was my own absence from the display. There were plenty of photos featuring my brothers, their wives, even their children. But after about age 18, I no longer appeared in any family moments. It was as if I had been erased. The living room beyond was crowded with guests, the conversations creating a wall of sound that momentarily intimidated me. I recognized some faces from my childhood, farmers and business owners from the surrounding area. Others were strangers, likely newer associates or friends. I spotted my father immediately. He stood by the fireplace, commanding attention as he always had, his silver hair the only real sign of his advancing age. His posture remained ramrod straight, his handshake firm as he greeted well-wishers. Jason, my older brother, stood beside him, looking like a younger version of our father. He was deep in conversation with an older man I recognized as the owner of the largest grain elevator in the county. Neither of them noticed my entrance. I made my way across the room, accepting a glass of punch from a passing tray. Several people glanced at me curiously, but didn't engage. I was clearly not recognized as part of the celebrated family. When I finally reached my father, Jason saw me first. His expression revealed momentary surprise before settling into careful neutrality. "Dad," he said, interrupting the ongoing conversation. "Look who's here." My father turned, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in over a decade. I searched his face for some sign of emotion, joy or anger or anything, but his expression remained impassive. "Abigail," he said with a nod. "You made it." No hug, no warm welcome, just acknowledgement of my presence. "Happy birthday, Dad," I replied, extending the carefully wrapped gift. "I thought you might like this." He took the package without comment and set it on the mantel behind him, atop a growing pile of presents. "Thank you for coming," he said formally, as if I were any other guest. Before I could respond, he turned back to his previous conversation, effectively dismissing me. Jason gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Good to see you, Abby. My wife Karen is around here somewhere. You haven't met her yet." "I'd like to," I said, grasping at this small olive branch. "We have 2 boys now," he continued. "Tyler is 7 and Michael is 4. "Congratulations," I replied sincerely. I didn't know I was an aunt. A flicker of guilt crossed his face. "Well, we don't exactly keep in touch, do we?" The accusation stung, placing the blame for our estrangement squarely on my shoulders rather than acknowledging the family dynamics that had pushed me away. "That goes both ways, Jason," I said quietly. He shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyway, enjoy the party. I think Curtis was looking for you earlier." With that, he moved away, rejoining our father's circle as if magnetized to it. The next hour passed in a blur of superficial conversations and uncomfortable silences. I met Jason's wife, Karen, who seemed pleasant but distant, and Curtis's wife, Stephanie, who at least made an effort to ask about my life in Omaha. "Curtis mentioned you have some sort of plant business?" she asked as we stood by the food table. "Agricultural technology," I corrected gently. "We develop irrigation systems and sustainable farming solutions." "How interesting," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Is it just a small operation?" "We have 47 employees now," I said, trying not to sound offensive. "Our systems are implemented on farms across 12 states." "Well, that's certainly something," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Curtis and Jason have expanded the family operation to 1,200 acres now. Your father's so proud." The conversation continued in this vein, each of my accomplishments minimized while my brother's work was elevated. It became clear that in this house, no matter what I achieved outside of it, I would always be seen as less than. When dinner was announced, I discovered I had been seated at the farthest table from my father, alongside distant neighbors and business acquaintances I barely knew. My brothers and their families occupied the main table with my parents, completing the picture of the family I was no longer considered part of. Throughout the meal, I could hear discussions about the farm's operations, plans for expansion, and decisions about new equipment purchases. All conversations that excluded me entirely, despite my professional expertise in exactly these areas. After dessert was served, I needed a moment alone and stepped onto the back porch for fresh air. The summer evening was beautiful, fireflies beginning to emerge as the sun set over the cornfields. I leaned against the railing, breathing deeply, trying to center myself. The screen door opened behind me, and I turned to see Jason approaching. For a moment, I hoped for a genuine connection, some acknowledgement of our shared childhood, or even just common courtesy. Instead, he looked at my boots, which had picked up a bit of dust from the gravel driveway. "If you're coming back inside, use the back door to the kitchen," he said. "We don't want your dirty boots tracking through the main house. Mom just had the carpets cleaned." I looked down at my footwear, then at his own boots, which were considerably more mud-caked than mine. The double standard was so blatant it would have been comical if it hadn't hurt so much. "My boots are cleaner than yours, Jason," I pointed out. He shrugged. "Just use the back door, Abby. No need to make a scene at Dad's party." As he turned to leave, I noticed several guests on the adjacent porch watching our interaction. The humiliation burned through me, not just from Jason's directive, but from the public nature of it. I was being put in my place, and everyone could see it. I remained outside longer than planned, gathering my composure and contemplating whether to simply leave. The celebration clearly wasn't meant to include me in any meaningful way. But leaving early would only confirm what they already thought, that I didn't belong and couldn't handle their world anymore. So I stayed, determined to see the evening through with dignity, if nothing else. I was making my way back to the party through the kitchen as instructed when I heard a commotion in the main room. A loud, enthusiastic voice cut through the general murmur of conversation. "Is Abigail Harmon here? I was told she might be attending." Curious, I moved toward the sound, emerging from the kitchen just as a well-dressed man in his 50s entered through the front door. I recognized him immediately as Marcus Thompson, president of the regional agricultural bank that financed many local farms, including, I suspected, my family's operation. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "There she is," he exclaimed, moving toward me with purpose. "Abigail Harmon, Madam CEO of Agritech Solutions. I was hoping to meet you tonight." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. My father, who had been engaged in conversation near the fireplace, froze mid-sentence. Jason and Curtis exchanged confused glances. Marcus reached me and extended his hand warmly. "Miss Harmon, your reputation precedes you. Your irrigation systems have revolutionized water conservation across the Midwest. I was telling my board just last week that we should be encouraging more of our clients to implement your technology." I shook his hand, acutely aware of the stunned silence around us. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That's very kind of you to say." "Kind nothing, it's the truth," he replied enthusiastically. "When Richard here mentioned his daughter would be attending, I made a special point to come by. I've been hoping to discuss potential partnership opportunities between our bank and Agritech." My father had mentioned me? That seemed unlikely given his cool reception earlier. Marcus turned to address the room, his arm still clasping my shoulder in collegial respect. "For those of you who don't know, Abigail's company is changing the face of modern agriculture. Their water conservation systems improve efficiency by over 30% while reducing costs. She was just featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of the most innovative leaders in agricultural technology." The expressions around the room transformed rapidly from confusion to interest, particularly among my father's business associates. Several people who had barely nodded at me earlier now looked at me with newfound curiosity and respect. "Forbes magazine," someone murmured. "Richard, you didn't tell us your daughter was so accomplished." My father's face was unreadable, a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Pride? Embarrassment? Resentment? Perhaps all three. Marcus continued, oblivious to the family dynamics he was disrupting. "And to think she developed these systems based on her experiences growing up on this very farm. Richard, you must be incredibly proud to have raised such an innovative entrepreneur." All eyes turned to my father, waiting for his response. The moment stretched uncomfortably as he seemed to search for words. Abigail has always had her own ideas about farming, he finally said, neither confirming nor denying pride in my accomplishments. Marcus didn't seem to notice the lukewarm response. Well, those ideas are making a significant impact. Several of our largest client farms have increased profitability by 20% after implementing her systems. The conversation shifted dramatically after that. Business associates who had ignored me all evening suddenly found reasons to approach, asking detailed questions about my company and technologies. Women who had dismissed me as Richard's absent daughter now wanted to know about my experiences as a female CEO in agriculture. I answered politely, maintaining professionalism despite the whiplash of suddenly being the center of positive attention after hours of deliberate exclusion. Through it all, I watched my family's reactions from the corner of my eye. My mother looked simultaneously proud and anxious. Curtis appeared bewildered. Jason seemed calculating, as if reassessing me as a potential business connection rather than just his estranged sister. My father remained stoic, accepting congratulations for my success with tight nods that suggested he'd had anything to do with it. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with increasingly influential members of the agricultural community, many of whom expressed interest in my technologies. I handed out business cards I fortunately had in my purse, making more valuable connections in one evening than I might have at an industry conference. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I finally found myself alone with my father. He had stepped outside to the old barn, away from the celebration that was beginning to wind down. Following an impulse I couldn't quite explain, I walked out to join him. He stood in the open doorway of the barn, looking at the antique tractor he had restored years ago. The same model as the miniature I had given him, though he had never opened my gift. "Dad," I said softly, announcing my presence. He turned slightly, acknowledging me without fully facing me. "Quite a stir you caused tonight." His tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. I took a deep breath, gathering courage for the question I needed to ask. "What's the name of my company, Dad?" He glanced at me, confusion creasing his brow. "My company," I repeated. "The one Marcus Thompson was talking about. The one featured in Forbes. What's it called?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, filled only with the distant sounds of the party and the chirping of crickets in the fields beyond. That was the moment I knew. He had no idea. Despite the clippings and magazines I'd sent home, despite my mother's updates during our calls, despite Marcus Thompson's enthusiastic description of my work, my father couldn't name the company I had built from nothing. I wasn't family, just the girl in dirty boots they made use the back door. "Agritech Solutions," I said finally, my voice steady despite the pain constricting my chest. "I founded it 9 years ago. We employ 47 people. Our systems are used on over 500 farms across 12 states. We've won innovation awards 3 years running." He nodded as if he'd known all along, but we both recognized the lie in that gesture. "You never read anything I sent, did you?" I asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I've been busy running this farm," he replied defensively. "Expanding the operation with your brothers." "I could have helped with that," I said quietly. "My entire career is built around making farms more efficient and profitable." He finally turned to face me fully. "You left, Abigail. You chose a different path." "I left because you gave me no choice," I corrected him. "You said farming wasn't for girls. You said not to come back if I went to college. You cut me out long before I ever stepped foot off this property." His jaw tightened, the familiar expression he wore when confronted with an uncomfortable truth. "We have different ideas about family obligations." "Family obligations?" I repeated incredulously. "Like inviting your daughter to use the service entrance at your birthday party? Like seating her with strangers instead of her own family?" "Curtis said you arrived late," he muttered. "The seating was already arranged." "I arrived at exactly the time Mom suggested," I countered. "And even if I had been late, would that justify treating me like an outsider?"
"I'm your daughter, Dad."
"Not some distant acquaintance you barely know." He didn't respond immediately, his gaze returning to the old tractor as if it might offer some escape from this conversation. "Your brothers have been here," he finally said, "working this land every day, building on what my father and grandfather started. They earned their place at that table. And I earned nothing by building a successful company from scratch?" By developing technologies that help farms just like ours? By making something of myself despite being told I couldn't? The questions hung in the air between us. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in my father's expression, as if he was considering perspectives he'd never entertained before. Our conversation was interrupted by Jason's arrival. He approached cautiously, sensing the tension. "Dad, Mom's looking for you. They want to do the cake soon." My father nodded, seeming almost relieved by the interruption. As he moved to leave, Jason lingered, his expression difficult to read. "Quite a surprise tonight, Abby," he said after our father was out of earshot. "You've done well for yourself." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I have." "You should have told us about your company," he continued, a hint of accusation in his tone. "We might have been able to implement your systems here." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. "I've been sending information home for years, Jason. Articles, brochures, everything. I was never hiding my success. You all just weren't interested in seeing it." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Well, things change. Maybe we should talk business while you're here. Now that you know my company might benefit you, suddenly I'm worth talking to?" I shook my head. "That's not how this works. I'm not just a business connection. I'm your sister." Curtis appeared in the barn doorway. "They're waiting for both of you for the cake cutting." I looked between my brothers, these men who shared my blood, but had stood by while I was systematically excluded from my own family. In that moment, I made a decision. "I think I'll skip the cake," I said calmly. "It's been a long day, and I have an early flight tomorrow." "But Dad will expect everyone to be there," Curtis protested. "I've been here all evening, and Dad has barely acknowledged me," I replied. "I doubt he'll notice if I slip out now." "Abby, don't be dramatic," Jason sighed. "Just come inside for the cake, and we can talk more tomorrow." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, my voice steady. "I'm setting boundaries. For years, I've accepted being treated as less than in this family. Tonight made it clear that the only value you see in me now is what my company might do for the farm. That's not the basis for rebuilding a relationship." I walked past them, head held high. "Tell Mom I'll call her tomorrow. And tell Dad happy birthday again." As I made my way to my car, still parked in the back by the equipment shed as instructed, I felt an odd mixture of sadness and liberation. The validation from Marcus Thompson and the other guests hadn't healed the wounds of family rejection, but it had confirmed what I'd always known. My path had value, whether my father recognized it or not. The hotel room felt sterile and empty after the emotionally charged evening. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:27 p.m., too late to call Rebecca under normal circumstances, but this night was anything but normal. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "How did it go?" "About as well as could be expected," I replied, then found myself recounting the entire evening, from being directed to the back door to the unexpected validation from Marcus Thompson to the confrontation with my father in the barn. "So, I just left," I concluded. "Skipped the cake cutting and drove back to the hotel." "I'm proud of you, Abby," Rebecca said firmly. "Setting boundaries doesn't make you dramatic. It makes you healthy." "Part of me feels like I should have stayed," I admitted. "Like leaving early just proves I don't belong." "You don't need to prove anything to people who refuse to see your worth," she reminded me. "You've built an amazing life and company without their support. That speaks for itself." We talked until after midnight, Rebecca's unwavering support a balm to the raw feelings the evening had exposed. After we hung up, I showered and prepared for bed, but sleep remained elusive. My mind kept replaying moments from the party, things I should have said or done differently. Around 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I dressed in comfortable jeans and a light sweater, then went down to the hotel restaurant for coffee as soon as it opened. Sitting by the window, watching the Nebraska sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. I wasn't ready to leave yet. I had come all this way, confronted the past in some measure, but there was still unfinished business. I needed one more conversation, one more chance to reclaim a piece of myself I had left behind all those years ago. By 7:30, I was driving back toward the farm. The morning was clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that showcases rural Nebraska at its best. I turned onto the familiar gravel road, my resolve strengthening with each mile. This time, I parked my rental car directly in the front driveway, making no concessions to the previous day's directives. The house was quiet, but smoke rose from the chimney of the small workshop where my father often started his days, tinkering with equipment before heading to the fields. As I approached the front door, it opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in her robe and slippers, surprise evident on her face. "Abigail, I didn't expect to see you this morning. I have a later flight than I originally planned," I explained. "I thought we could talk before I leave." She stepped back, gesturing me inside. "Of course.
Come in."
I'll make coffee." "Actually," I said, standing my ground, "I'd like to talk to Dad too." "Is he in the workshop?" Her expression shifted to concern. "Yes, but Abby, after last night, maybe give him some time." "I've given him 10 years, Mom," I replied gently but firmly. "I'm not leaving without saying what I need to say." She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "I'll go get him." I waited in the living room, taking in the familiar space now returned to its normal state after the party. Family photos lined the mantel, the same ones I had noticed last night that erased my existence after age 18. The formal family portrait taken on my parents' 30th anniversary hung above the fireplace, a gathering I hadn't been invited to attend. My mother returned a few minutes later, my father following reluctantly behind her. He looked tired, the celebration and perhaps our confrontation having taken a toll. "Abigail has something to say," my mother announced, her tone suggesting she wouldn't allow him to dismiss me this time. She sat in her favorite armchair, a silent statement that she intended to witness this conversation. My father remained standing, arms crossed. "I thought you'd left." "I'm catching a later flight," I explained. "There are things we need to discuss before I go." He sighed but nodded for me to continue. "Last night made it clear where I stand in this family," I began. "For years, I've tried to maintain some connection, sending updates about my life and company, calling Mom regularly, reaching out on holidays. But I've accepted scraps of acknowledgement in return." "We've been busy with the farm," he started, the same excuse he'd used for years. "So have I countered. Building a multi-million-dollar company isn't exactly leisurely. But I still made time for family, or at least tried to." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Abby, your father does care." "He just what, Mom?" I asked, turning to her. "Just couldn't pick up the phone once a year? Just couldn't read the articles I sent? Just couldn't acknowledge my existence until Marcus Thompson made it uncomfortable not to?" My directness seemed to surprise them both. The daughter they remembered had been more willing to accommodate, to accept less than she deserved. "I didn't come here to rehash old grievances," I continued. "I came to establish where we go from here. I won't be treated as an outsider in my own family anymore. I won't use the back door or hide my accomplishments or pretend to be less than I am to make anyone more comfortable." My father's posture remained defensive, but he was listening, which was more than he had done in years. "You chose to leave," he said finally, repeating his statement from the night before. "You knew what that meant for your place here." "I chose education," I corrected him. "I chose to pursue my passion for agricultural science. I chose not to be limited by outdated ideas about what a woman could achieve in farming. Those were all valid choices that shouldn't have cost me my family." Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition he seemed reluctant to acknowledge. "Your technology," he said abruptly. "Thompson said it increases efficiency substantially." The sudden pivot to business felt like another evasion, but I decided to meet him where he was willing to engage.
"Yes.
"Our irrigation systems reduce water usage by 30% while maintaining crop yields. The soil monitoring technology prevents overwatering and nutrient leaching. Most farms see a return on investment within 2 growing seasons." He nodded, processing the information. "We've been considering modernizing some of our systems." "Richard," my mother interjected, her tone sharp with frustration. "This isn't about business. This is about our daughter." His jaw tightened at her rebuke, but surprisingly, he didn't dismiss it. After a moment of tense silence, he looked at me directly. "Your brothers felt overshadowed last night," he admitted reluctantly. "When Thompson made that announcement, it changed how people looked at them." Understanding dawned. "You're worried I made them look bad." "They've worked this land faithfully," he insisted. "Built on what I taught them. And then you come back after 10 years, and suddenly you're the agricultural expert everyone wants to talk to. I earned that recognition, I said firmly, just as they've earned their place here. There's room for different kinds of success in one family, Dad. My mother stood up suddenly. I've had enough of this. Richard, for 10 years I've watched you push our daughter away because you couldn't handle that she found a different path to success in agriculture. A path you didn't control. I've been quiet about it to keep the peace, but no more. Both my father and I stared at her in shock. My soft-spoken mother rarely confronted anyone, least of all her husband. Abby sends us every article, every achievement, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I've kept them all in a box in my closet because you refuse to look at them. She calls monthly even when you won't come to the phone. She's extended olive branch after olive branch while you and the boys have given nothing in return. My father looked stunned by her outburst. Margaret.
No, Richard.
It's time you heard this. Our daughter has built something remarkable completely on her own. No inherited land, no family support, nothing but her own intelligence and determination. If you can't find it in yourself to be proud of that, then the failure is yours, not hers. Tears welled in my eyes at my mother's unexpected defense. For years, I had assumed her silence meant she sided with my father. Now I realized she had been fighting her own quiet battle all along. The three of us stood in a triangle of tension, decades of unspoken feelings suddenly exposed. Then, unexpectedly, the front door opened, and Jason and Curtis walked in. "Car's still here," Curtis said, then stopped short when he saw us.
Oh.
"Sorry, we didn't know you had company." "Not company," my mother corrected firmly. "Family. Your sister is family." The brothers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jason stepped forward first, his expression contrite. "About last night, Abby," he began awkwardly. "The back door thing, that wasn't right." Curtis nodded in agreement. "And the seating arrangements. Mom told us this morning she had nothing to do with that. It was our idea." Their admission surprised me. I had assumed my father had orchestrated my exclusion, but it seemed my brothers had taken it upon themselves to keep me at a distance. "Why?" I asked simply. Jason looked at the floor. "Honestly, we were jealous. You got out, built something impressive. We stayed, and just continued what was already here." "That's nothing to be ashamed of," I told him. "This farm is your passion, just like my company is mine." "We should have made more effort," Curtis admitted. "When Mom told us you were coming, we panicked a bit. It was easier to keep you separate than to figure out how to reconnect after so long." Their honesty, however belated, opened a door I had thought permanently closed. Not to instant reconciliation, but to the possibility of something better than the estrangement of the past decade. "I'd like to see the greenhouse before I go," I said, addressing no one in particular. "My old greenhouse. Is it still there?" My father nodded. "It's still standing. Hasn't been used much since you left. I'd like to visit it alone if that's okay." No one objected. As I turned to leave, my father spoke again. "Abigail," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Your company, Agri-Tech Solutions. It's a good name." It wasn't an apology or even a compliment really, but for my father, it felt like a significant concession. I nodded my acknowledgement and stepped outside into the morning sun. The path to my old greenhouse was overgrown, suggesting it hadn't been visited regularly in years. The structure itself looked weathered, the plastic cloudy with age, and the wooden frame in need of repair. But it was still standing, a physical reminder of where my journey had begun. I pushed open the door, wincing at the squeak of rusted hinges. Inside, dust covered the abandoned shelving and planting beds. Equipment I had salvaged and repurposed as a teenager lay scattered and forgotten. But in one corner, miraculously, a single plant still grew, its tenacious roots finding enough moisture and nutrients to survive years of neglect. I recognized it immediately, a descendant of my first experimental crossbreed, a drought-resistant tomato variety that had formed the basis of my early research. Kneeling beside it, I carefully extracted a small cutting, wrapping it in a moistened paper towel from my purse. This tiny fragment of my past would come with me, a symbol of both my roots and my growth beyond them. Whatever happened with my family from this point forward, I had reclaimed this piece of my history. As I emerged from the greenhouse, I saw my family waiting by the house. Not rushing me, not intruding on my moment, but acknowledging through their presence that this place was part of my story too. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. 6 months after my father's birthday party, I found myself once again driving the familiar route to the family farm. This time, however, the invitation had come directly from my father, a brief but significant phone call requesting my professional opinion on modernizing their irrigation systems. The months between had seen small but meaningful changes in our family dynamic. My mother had visited my home in Omaha twice, marveling at the garden system I had installed and sitting in on a company meeting where she watched me lead a team of engineers with obvious pride. My brothers had reached out occasionally with agricultural questions, tentative bridges across the chasm that had separated us for so long. My father remained the most distant, our conversations still formal and primarily focused on business matters. But he had called, and for a man like Richard Harmon, that represented a seismic shift. As I pulled into the farm's driveway, I noticed immediately that I wasn't directed to the back. Instead, my father himself came out to greet me, walking with a slight stiffness that 60 years of physical labor had left in his gait. "Abigail," he said with a nod. "Good drive?" "No traffic," I replied, matching his practical tone. "The fields look good." He glanced toward the expansive cornfields with the critical eye of a lifelong farmer. "Could be better. That's why I called." We walked together toward the western fields, where inefficient irrigation had always created problems. As he outlined the issues they were facing, I recognized this technical discussion for what it was, my father's version of an olive branch. "I can have my team conduct a full assessment," I offered. "Give you a comprehensive proposal for updating the entire system." "That would be helpful," he acknowledged. Then, after a pause, "Your mother says your company just won another award." "Environmental innovation in agriculture," I confirmed, "for our new soil moisture sensors." He nodded, and I caught something like pride in his expression before he masked it. "Good work." Those two simple words, from a man who had never acknowledged my professional accomplishments, felt monumental. The consultation visit extended into dinner, where I joined my parents at the kitchen table, the same one where I had eaten countless meals growing up. The conversation remained largely focused on agricultural topics, but underneath ran a current of something new, a grudging respect that hadn't been there before. After that initial visit, a cautious pattern emerged. Monthly phone calls with my father about the irrigation installation progress evolved to include brief, personal updates. My mother began sending care packages to my office, homemade cookies and preserves that my team quickly learned to anticipate. My brothers consulted me about crop selection for the coming season, acknowledging my expertise in ways they never had before. It wasn't the warm, instantaneous reconciliation depicted in movies. It was halting, imperfect, and sometimes frustrating. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, requiring firm boundaries and direct conversations. But it was progress, more than I had allowed myself to hope for after years of estrangement. The healing process extended beyond my family relationships. At Rebecca's suggestion, I had started therapy shortly after returning from my father's birthday party, working through the childhood wounds that had shaped so much of my adult life. The persistent feeling of being not enough that had driven both my ambition and my insecurities began to loosen its grip as I recognized its origins in family dynamics rather than personal inadequacy. As I processed my own experiences, I became increasingly aware of how many young women from rural backgrounds faced similar barriers to pursuing careers in agricultural science and technology. In response, I established the Rural Innovation Scholarship for girls from farming communities interested in agricultural technology, funding not just their education but mentorship and internship opportunities at Agritech Solutions. The program quickly became one of my greatest sources of pride. Watching these young women discover their potential, often against family expectations similar to those I had faced, felt like breaking a cycle that had limited too many bright minds for too many generations. When Thanksgiving approached, I received an unexpected invitation from my mother. Would I join them for the holiday? The full family would be gathered, including my brothers, their wives, and my nieces and nephews, some of whom I had yet to meet in person. "Your father specifically asked if you were coming," she added, the significance of this detail clear in her tone. I accepted with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Holiday gatherings amplified family dynamics, both positive and negative. But I was different now, stronger in my boundaries and clearer about my worth. Whatever happened, I could handle it with grace. Arriving at the farm on Thanksgiving morning, I noticed immediately that no one directed me where to park or which entrance to use. I pulled up beside my brother's trucks and approached the front door naturally, as if there had never been any question about my right to do so. My mother opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a warm hug that smelled of sage and cinnamon. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart. Come in, everyone's in the living room." The scene that greeted me was both familiar and strange. My family engaged in their holiday traditions, but with new additions I had missed during my years away. Jason's sons, Tyler and Michael, whom I knew only from photos, played a board game on the coffee table. Curtis's daughter Lily, just 4 years old, shyly peeked at me from behind her father's legs. My father sat in his favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what looked like the irrigation system specs I had sent over the previous week. "Aunt Abby's here," Jason announced, rising to greet me with a warmth that still felt new and fragile. Curtis followed, guiding his daughter forward. "Lily, this is your Aunt Abigail. Remember we talked about her? She makes the special water systems for farms." The little girl regarded me solemnly before asking, "Do you make tractors too?" I laughed, kneeling to her level. "No, just the water systems. But tractors are pretty cool too." "Dad says your systems are saving us money," Jason's older son Tyler interjected with the directness of a 7-year-old. "Are you rich, Tyler?" His mother Karen scolded, but I waved away her concern. "My company does well," I told him honestly. "But the best part isn't the money. It's helping farms like your grandpa's grow more food while using less water." My father looked up from his papers at this exchange. "Abigail's systems have increased our yield by 14% this first season," he stated matter-of-factly. That's significant. Coming from him, this practical acknowledgement of my contribution felt more genuine than any effusive praise might have. Our eyes met briefly across the room, a moment of mutual recognition passing between us. The day progressed with the comfortable rhythms of a family holiday, though occasional moments of awkwardness reminded us all that we were still finding our way back to each other. My brothers made efforts to include me in conversations about the farm's operations, seeking my input rather than excluding me as they once had. My nephews and niece gradually warmed to my presence, peppering me with questions about city life and my work. After dinner, as the family dispersed to various post-meal activities, I found myself alone with my father in his study. He had been reviewing the latest soil analysis from the western fields, but he set the papers aside as I entered. "The irrigation system is performing well," he said, his standard opening for our conversations these days. "I'm glad to hear it," I replied, taking the chair opposite his desk. "The team says the soil moisture levels are optimal now." He nodded, then fell silent, seemingly contemplating something beyond our usual technical discussions. When he finally spoke again, his words surprised me. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About a lot of things." I waited, unsure where this unprecedented admission was leading. "Farming has changed," he continued. "The methods my father taught me that I taught your brothers, they're not enough anymore. The climate, the market, everything is different. We need the kind of innovation you've been pushing for all along." It wasn't quite a personal apology, framed instead in terms of agricultural practicality, but I recognized the significant concession within it. "It's not about rejecting traditional farming," I offered. "It's about building on that foundation with new approaches. The best operations combine both. Like this family should have done," he said, the parallel unmistakable. "Instead of pushing you away, we should have seen the value in your different perspective." For a moment, I couldn't speak, the acknowledgement I had sought for so long finally being offered in my father's own way. "It's not too late," I said when I found my voice again. "For the farm or for us." He met my gaze directly, allowing me to see the regret he typically kept hidden. "I missed a lot. Your graduations. Your company milestones. Things a father should have been there for." "Yes," I agreed, not softening this truth. "You did miss those things. And we can't get them back. But there will be new milestones." Something in my father's expression shifted, a tension releasing that he might have carried for years. Your mother kept every article, every award announcement. Has them all in albums upstairs. She made me look through them after you left that morning. The image of my mother carefully preserving the record of my achievements, even when my father refused to acknowledge them, brought tears to my eyes. Her quiet resistance had been its own form of strength all along. I'd like to see those albums sometime, I said. He nodded. She'd like that too. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the study that had once felt like forbidden territory, now a neutral ground where we could meet as adults with mutual respect, if not perfect understanding. When I returned to the living room, my mother was organizing a family photo, something I had been conspicuously excluded from at my father's birthday party. This time, she positioned me prominently beside her, my father on her other side, our brothers and their families gathered around us. Everyone smile, she instructed as Jason's wife Karen held up the camera. It wasn't a perfect photograph. My father's smile looked somewhat forced, as it always did in pictures. Curtis's daughter Lily was looking away at something more interesting. But I was there, unquestionably part of the family record once again. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, my father walked me to my car. The November air was crisp, our breath visible in small clouds as we stood in the driveway. "When will you be back?" he asked, a question that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "I have a conference in Chicago next week," I replied. "But I could stop by on my way back. The team wants updated readings from the Eastern fields." He nodded. "Your mother would like that. The boys too." "And you?" I wanted to ask but didn't. Some things remained difficult to express between us. As if hearing my unspoken question, he added gruffly, "I would too." The admission, simple as it was, represented monumental change. Driving away from the farm that evening, I reflected on the long, complicated journey that had brought me to this point. The painful exclusion at my father's birthday party had forced confrontations and conversations that might otherwise have been avoided for years more. The public recognition from Marcus Thompson had catalyzed a shift in how my family perceived me, but the real change had come from standing firmly in my worth and refusing to accept less than I deserved. The relationship with my family continued to evolve in the months that followed. Some visits were easier than others. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, requiring patient reinforcement of new boundaries. But the trajectory remained positive, a slow healing of wounds that had once seemed permanent. What I came to understand most profoundly was that validation from others, even family, could never replace self-validation. The years of seeking my father's approval had driven me to achieve, but had also left me vulnerable to his rejection. True peace came not from finally receiving his recognition, but from no longer requiring it to know my worth. I kept the cutting from my old greenhouse in a place of honor in my office garden. From that single survivor, we had propagated an entire line of drought-resistant plants that now formed the basis for an urban gardening initiative in food deserts across the Midwest. Its tenacity in surviving years of neglect mirrored something in my own journey, a testament to finding nourishment and growth even in inhospitable conditions. The relationship with my family would never be perfect. Too much history, too many ingrained patterns stood in the way of storybook reconciliation. But it could be authentic, honest in both its limitations and its possibilities. I no longer needed to choose between my identity as a Harmon and my identity as the founder and CEO of Agritech Solutions. Both were true, both were valuable, both were me. The backdoor incident at my father's birthday had been painful, but ultimately transformative. It had forced me to confront not just how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. No longer willing to accept less than I deserved, I had reclaimed my place not through their validation, but through my own unwavering certainty of my worth. Have you ever had to stand up for your own worth in a family that couldn't see your value? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of finding strength through life's challenges. Remember, sometimes the most profound growth comes from the moments when we're forced to use the back door, only to find our way, on our own terms, to the front. Thank you for listening, and may you always know your worth, regardless of whether others recognize it.